He insulted his bride in front of everyone. Her next move shocked the whole church. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the bridal suite at the Riverside Inn. Sarah Chen sat perfectly still as the makeup artist applied the final touches of mascara, transforming her already beautiful almond eyes into something that belonged in a fairy tale. Her wedding dress hung on the antique wardrobe behind her, a stunning ivory gown with delicate beading. That had taken her breath away the moment she'd seen it in the boutique window 6 months ago. "You look absolutely radiant," her mother whispered, adjusting the pearl necklace around Sarah's neck. It was the same necklace her grandmother had worn on her wedding day in 1952, passed down through 3 generations of women who had believed in love, commitment, and forever. Sarah tried to smile, but something felt off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, just a strange heaviness in her chest that she'd been trying to ignore all morning. She told herself it was just nerves, that every bride felt this way on her wedding day. Marcus loved her. He'd proposed on a beach in Hawaii, gotten down on one knee in the sand as the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. He'd told her she was his everything, his forever, his dream come true. So why did she feel like she was walking towards something dark instead of something bright? "It's time," Emma, her maid of honor and younger sister, announced from the doorway. She looked beautiful in her dusty rose bridesmaid dress, her dark hair swept up in an elegant twist. "The church is packed. I've never seen St. Mary's so full. Everyone's waiting for you." Sarah took a deep breath and stood up, the weight of her dress settling around her like a cloud. Her mother handed her the bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, and together they walked down the stairs to where her father waited in his best suit, tears already streaming down his weathered face. "My little girl," he choked out, pulling her into a gentle hug. "You're so beautiful. I can't believe this day is finally here." They climbed into the vintage Rolls-Royce that would take them the 3 blocks to the church. Sarah watched the familiar streets of her hometown roll by the coffee shop where she and Marcus had their first date, the park where they'd had their first kiss, the movie theater where he'd first told her he loved her. 3 years of memories compressed into a 15-minute drive. St. Mary's Cathedral rose before them like something out of a Gothic novel, its stone spires reaching toward the cloudy sky. Sarah could hear the organ music drifting through the massive oak doors, could see the guests streaming inside in their finest clothes. 200 people had accepted their invitation. 200 people had cleared their schedules, bought gifts, traveled from across the country to witness this moment. Her father helped her out of the car, and suddenly the bridesmaids were surrounding her, fussing over her dress, making sure her veil was perfect, telling her how stunning she looked. Emma squeezed her hand and whispered, "You ready for this?" Sarah nodded, even though that strange heaviness in her chest had grown heavier. The doors opened, and the wedding march began. Every head turned to watch as Sarah appeared at the entrance, her arm linked through her father's. She could see Marcus standing at the altar in his tailored black tuxedo, his groomsmen lined up beside him. The church looked like something out of a magazine, flowers everywhere, candles flickering, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows and painting everything in jewel tones. Each step down that long aisle felt like walking through honey, slow, difficult, surreal. Sarah focused on Marcus's face, trying to find comfort there, trying to remember why she'd said yes to his proposal. He wasn't smiling. In fact, he looked almost annoyed, his jaw tight, his eyes hard. Finally, she reached the altar. Her father lifted her veil and kissed her forehead before placing her hand in Marcus's. His palm was cold and slightly damp. She tried to meet his eyes, but he was looking past her, scanning the congregation with an expression she couldn't quite read. Reverend Thompson, who had baptized Sarah as a baby and confirmed her at 13, smiled warmly at them both. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Sarah Elizabeth Chen and Marcus James Crawford in holy matrimony. This is a sacred covenant, a promise made before God and these witnesses, to love, honor, and cherish one another for all the days of your lives." The Reverend continued with the traditional opening remarks, talking about the meaning of marriage, the responsibilities it carried, the joy it could bring. Sarah tried to focus on his words, but her attention kept drifting to Marcus, who still wouldn't look at her directly. "Before we proceed with the vows," Reverend Thompson said, The groom has asked for a moment to share something with his bride. Sarah blinked in surprise. This wasn't in the program. They hadn't discussed Marcus giving a speech. She watched as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, his movement stiff and deliberate. "I wrote something," Marcus said, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent church. "Something I think needs to be said before we go any further." Sarah felt her stomach drop. The heaviness in her chest exploded into full-blown panic, but she was frozen, unable to move or speak, trapped in this moment like an insect in amber. Marcus unfolded the paper with deliberate slowness, and when he finally looked at her, his eyes were cold. "Sarah, for the past year, you've been obsessed with planning this wedding. You spent hours choosing flowers, obsessing over table settings, debating font choices for the invitation. You know what you should have been obsessing over? Yourself." The church went deathly quiet. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "You've gained at least 25 pounds since I proposed to you," Marcus continued, his voice matter-of-fact, as if he were reading a grocery list, instead of destroying someone's soul in front of 200 people. "I told you months ago that you needed to get serious about the gym. I bought you a membership. I even offered to hire a personal trainer, but instead you kept making excuses. You kept eating whatever you wanted, going to every single cake tasting, every catering appointment." Sarah heard gasps from the pews. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw her mother stand up, her face flushed with fury. She saw Emma take a step forward, as if to physically intervene. But Sarah herself couldn't move. She stood there holding her bouquet, feeling her entire world crumble around her like a sandcastle hit by a wave. "Honestly," Marcus said, and now there was something almost cruel in his smile, "I'm embarrassed. This isn't the woman I proposed to on that beach in Hawaii. That woman was fit, confident, put together. The woman standing in front of me right now, I barely recognize her." He refolded the paper and tucked it back into his pocket, finally meeting her eyes. "I'm just being honest, Sarah. Someone needs to tell you the truth. You've let yourself go, and everyone here can see it. I thought you should know before we exchange vows and you become my wife, because I'm not sure I can promise to love, honor, and cherish someone who doesn't even love and honor herself enough to stay in shape." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could feel 200 pairs of eyes on her, could sense the collective horror and disbelief emanating from the congregation. Her hands were shaking so badly that the bouquet trembled like it was caught in an earthquake. Tears blurred her vision, making the church swim and distort. For one terrible moment, she thought she might actually faint. The edges of her vision went dark, and she could feel herself swaying on her feet. Then, something inside her snapped. It wasn't a loud snap, like a branch breaking in a storm. It was quiet, subtle, like a lock clicking open on a door that had been sealed for too long. And suddenly, instead of feeling broken, Sarah felt clear, crystal clear, like someone had wiped fog off a mirror, and she could finally see herself for the first time in months. She took a slow, deliberate breath and lifted her head. The tears were still there, but they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of rage, of recognition, of something that felt almost like relief. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through every corner of that massive church. "Absolutely not." Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting any response. "Sarah, I said no." This time her voice was stronger, louder. She turned away from Marcus and faced the congregation, 200 faces staring back at her in shock and sympathy and horror. "I want to thank every single one of you for being here today. You bought gifts, you took time off work, you traveled across the country, you got dressed up and came to this beautiful church because you thought you were going to witness a celebration of love." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. "Instead, you just witnessed something very different. You witnessed a man who claims to love me tell me, in front of everyone I care about, that I'm not good enough for him, that my body is an embarrassment, that I've let myself go because I dared to gain weight while planning what I thought was going to be the happiest day of my life." She could see people crying now. Her grandmother was sobbing into a handkerchief. Her father looked like he wanted to kill someone. Emma was already moving toward her, but Sarah held up a hand to stop her. "I need to say this," Sarah continued, and now she turned back to Marcus, who was starting to look decidedly uncomfortable. "You're right about one thing. I have changed over the past year. I gained weight because I was stressed, because I was trying so hard to be perfect for you, to plan the perfect wedding, to become the perfect wife. I stopped going to yoga classes because I was busy meeting with caterers. I stopped cooking healthy meals because I was exhausted from working full-time and planning this entire event basically by myself. She paused, letting the words sink in. But you know what else changed? I lost myself. I stopped spending time with my friends because you said they were a bad influence. I stopped pursuing my painting because you said it was a waste of time. I stopped wearing the clothes I loved because you said they weren't flattering. I became smaller and smaller, not in body but in spirit, trying to fit into whatever box you had decided I should occupy. Marcus's face had gone from pale to flushed. Sarah, can we talk about this in private? No. The word was like a gunshot. You chose to humiliate me publicly, so I'm going to respond publicly. You stood at this altar, in front of my family and friends, in front of God, and you told me I'm not good enough. Well, I have news for you, Marcus. You're right, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough to waste one more second of my life with someone who sees me as a project to fix, instead of a person to love. She reached up and removed her veil, the pins catching in her hair. She didn't care. She pulled it off and let it fall to the floor in a puddle of white tulle. Then she slid the engagement ring off her finger, the ring she'd worn for a year, the ring that had felt heavier and heavier with each passing month. This ring, she said, holding it up so everyone could see it sparkle in the stained glass light, represents a promise to love unconditionally, to support each other through thick and thin, and I mean that literally, to be partners, teammates, best friends. You just broke that promise in the most spectacular way possible. She pressed the ring into Marcus's hand, her fingers trembling. I'm not marrying you. Not today, not ever, because I finally realize that I deserve someone who loves me on my worst day, at my heaviest weight, with no makeup and messy hair. I deserve someone who would never, ever stand in front of a church full of people and try to make me feel small. Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You're making a huge mistake. You're throwing away 3 years. No, Sarah interrupted. You threw it away the moment you decided your ego was more important than my humanity. She turned back to the congregation one last time. My father spent a lot of money on this wedding. There's a reception at the Grand Plaza Hotel with food and music and an open bar. I would be honored if all of you would join me there, not to celebrate a wedding, but to celebrate something much more important, the courage to choose yourself when someone else tries to make you feel worthless. Looking at Emma, who was openly weeping now, Sarah managed a small smile. I'm going to need your help getting out of this dress. But then we're going to party like it's the best day of our lives, because honestly, it might be. The church erupted. It started with her father, who shot to his feet with a roar of approval that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Then her mother, her grandmother Emma, the bridesmaids. Within seconds, the entire congregation was standing, applauding, some crying, some cheering, creating a wall of sound and support that washed over Sarah like a wave. Marcus stood alone at the altar, the ring clutched in his hand, his face cycling through emotions so fast Sarah couldn't track them all: shock, anger, disbelief, and finally something that looked almost like fear as he realized what he'd just lost, what he'd thrown away with his cruelty. But Sarah wasn't looking at him anymore. She was already walking back down that aisle, but this time she wasn't walking towards something, she was walking away from it. Away from Marcus, away from the person she'd been trying to become for him, away from all the small compromises and quiet sacrifices that had been slowly eroding her spirit. Her father met her halfway down the aisle and pulled her into a fierce hug. "That's my girl," he whispered into her hair. "That's my brave, beautiful, perfect girl." Emma appeared on her other side, linking arms with her. "We're getting you out of here, and then we're going to have the most epic party this town has ever seen." As they walked toward the exit, person after person reached out to touch Sarah's hand, to whisper encouragement, to tell her how proud they were. Her college roommate was crying so hard she could barely speak. Her cousin called out, "You're my hero." Her high school art teacher squeezed her hand and said, "Paint again. Promise me you'll paint again." The photographer, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, was still snapping pictures, tears streaming down her face. "These are going in your album," she called out. The day you saved your own life. 2 hours later, Sarah stood in the bridal suite at the Grand Plaza Hotel wearing a simple white cocktail dress that Emma had somehow magicked into existence. She'd washed off most of her makeup, let down her hair, and kicked off the tortuous heels that had been part of her bridal ensemble. Looking at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back, but in a good way this time. This woman looked free. "Ready?" Emma asked from the doorway, holding out her hand. Sarah took it, and together they walked down to the ballroom where she could already hear music and laughter and the sound of people enjoying themselves. She paused at the entrance, suddenly nervous. What if people pitied her? What if they thought she'd made a mistake? What if? The moment she stepped into the room, the entire party erupted in applause. Every single person who had been at the church was there, and they were all on their feet, clapping and cheering like she just won an Olympic gold medal. Her father was the first to reach her, pulling her onto the dance floor as the band launched into her favorite song. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," he said as they swayed together. "I never liked that boy anyway." Sarah laughed, a real, genuine, from the belly laugh that felt like it came from a place inside her that had been silent for too long. "Dad, you walked me down the aisle. Well, I wasn't going to tell you my doubts at the altar, was I?" He grinned, that familiar mischievous smile she'd inherited, but the second he opened his mouth, "I knew you'd make the right choice. You've always been the strongest person in any room. Even when you were 3 years old, and you punched that kid who was bullying your sister." The night unfolded like a dream, or maybe like waking up from a nightmare. Sarah found herself surrounded by love, real and unconditional and pure. Her grandmother pulled her aside and told her about the time she'd almost married the wrong man in 1951 and how calling it off had been the best decision of her life. Her college roommate gave a toast about the time Sarah had stood up to a sexist professor. Her little cousin, only 8 years old, whispered that Sarah was the coolest bride ever because she told that mean man to go away. Around midnight, Sarah found herself on the hotel balcony with Emma, both of them, looking out at the city lights with glasses of champagne in their hands. "Any regrets?" Emma asked quietly. Sarah thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about Marcus's face when she'd handed back the ring. She thought about the 3 years she'd invested in that relationship. She thought about all the plans they'd made, all the dreams that were now never going to happen. "No," she finally said, and meant it. "No regrets, just relief. What are you going to do now?" Sarah looked down at her bare left hand. The ring had left a slight indentation, but even that was already starting to fade. "Remember that trip to Italy we were supposed to take for the honeymoon? The one Marcus said was too expensive, too impractical." "Yeah, I'm going alone. And I'm going to eat all the pasta I want, drink all the wine, visit all the museums, and not apologize for taking up space in the world." Emma linked her arm through Sarah's. "You won't be alone. I'm coming with you." "Em, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Besides, someone needs to make sure you actually talk to some cute Italian boys instead of just eating gelato and crying." They both laughed, and the sound carried out over the sleeping city. The weeks that followed were both harder and easier than Sarah had expected. Marcus tried to contact her first with angry texts about how she'd embarrassed him, then with apologetic emails promising he'd change, finally with desperate phone calls that she never answered. After 2 weeks, she blocked his number. Moving out of the apartment they'd shared was painful. Untangling their lives, the shared bank account, the joint gym membership, the streaming services felt like surgery without anesthesia. There were moments when Sarah cried so hard she thought she might actually break in half. But there were also moments of unexpected joy. The first time she went out to dinner with friends and ordered whatever she wanted without worrying about calories. The first Saturday morning she spent painting instead of at the gym. The first time she laughed, really laughed, without feeling like she needed permission. 3 months after the non-wedding, Sarah boarded a plane to Rome with Emma beside her and a carry-on full of sundresses she'd bought without Marcus's input. As the plane lifted off, she felt lighter than she had in years. Italy was everything she'd dreamed and more. She stood in the Sistine Chapel with her head tilted back, tears streaming down her face, at the beauty of Michelangelo's ceiling. She ate cacio e pepe in a tiny restaurant in Trastevere, while an old Italian man played accordion. She drank Aperol, spritzes in Positano, watching the sunset paint the Amalfi Coast in impossible colors. And yes, she met a cute Italian boy actually, several cute Italian boys, and she flirted shamelessly with all of them, remembering what it felt like to be seen as desirable, interesting, worthy of attention. But more than any of that, she rediscovered herself. She bought a sketchbook and filled it with drawings of everything she saw: churches and piazzas and lemons hanging from trees. She wrote in her journal every night, processing everything that had happened, everything she was feeling. She let herself eat gelato twice a day if she wanted to, and some days she did, and some days she didn't, and both were okay. On their last day in Florence, Sarah stood in front of Botticelli's Birth of Venus in the Uffizi Gallery. She stared at Venus rising from the sea foam, unashamed of her body, powerful in her nakedness. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Emma asked beside her. That Venus could definitely use a sandwich. They both burst out laughing, earning disapproving looks from nearby tourists. But later, back at their hotel, Sarah looked at the photo Emma had taken of her in front of the painting. She looked happy. She looked free. She looked like herself. She posted it to Instagram with a caption, "3 months ago I was supposed to get married. Instead I got free. Best decision I ever made." The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments from friends and strangers alike, sharing their own story of walking away, of choosing themselves, of finding courage in moments of crisis. Several women messaged her privately to say that seeing her walk away from that altar had given them the strength to leave their own bad relationships. Sarah realized then that her moment of heartbreak had somehow become bigger than just her own story. It had become a testament to the power of self-respect, of knowing your worth, of refusing to accept less than you deserve. 6 months after the non-wedding, Sarah was sitting in her new apartment, a cozy one-bedroom with big windows and hardwood floors, when her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made her answer it. "Sarah Chan?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes, my name is Rachel Martinez. I'm a literary agent in New York. I saw your Instagram post about your wedding, and I've been following your journey ever since. I was wondering if you'd ever considered writing a book about your experience." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "A book? I think your story could help a lot of people. And from what I've seen of your writing on social media, you have a real gift for expressing complex emotions in accessible ways. Would you be interested in talking about it?" 3 months later, Sarah signed a book deal. 6 months after that, she held the first copy of Walking Away: How I Left My Wedding and Found Myself in her trembling hands. The book became a bestseller almost overnight. Sarah did interviews, went on book tours, spoke at colleges and women's conferences. Everywhere she went, women and men came up to her to share their own stories of walking away from situations that didn't serve them. A year after the non-wedding, Sarah was invited back to St. Mary's Cathedral to give a talk about self-worth and dignity, standing at the same altar where her life had imploded and rebuilt itself. In the span of 15 minutes, she looked out at the packed pews and smiled. "I want to tell you about the worst and best day of my life," she began, her voice steady and strong. "About the day I lost everything and found myself." As she spoke, she could see people crying, nodding, understanding. She saw women grip their partners' hands a little tighter. She saw a young girl sit up straighter, like they were absorbing a lesson they hadn't known they needed. After the talk, a teenage girl approached her shyly. "Miss Chen, I just wanted to say thank you. My boyfriend has been telling me I need to lose weight, and I was starting to believe him. But after hearing your story, I realized I deserve better." Sarah pulled the girl into a hug, tears streaming down her own face. "You absolutely do. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you're not enough exactly as you are." That night, back in her apartment, Sarah looked at the painting she'd been working on, a self-portrait, something she never would have had the courage to attempt a year ago. In the painting, she was standing in a church in a wedding dress, but she wasn't looking at the groom. She was looking at herself in a mirror, really seeing herself for the first time. She titled it "The Day I Said I Do to Myself." 2 years after the non-wedding, Sarah ran into Marcus at a coffee shop. It was awkward at first. He'd gained weight, looked tired, seemed uncomfortable in his own skin. They made small talk for a few minutes, dancing around the elephant in the room. Finally, Marcus said, "I read your book." Sarah waited, not sure what to expect. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry for what I said to you that day. I was cruel and wrong, and I've regretted it every day since. Seeing how you've thrived, everything you've accomplished, it made me realize how much I lost when I tried to make you feel small. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. She could feel the old pain trying to resurface, but it was distant now, like an echo from far away. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "I hope you've learned something from it. I hope you treat your next partner better than you treated me." "I'm in therapy," Marcus admitted. "Working on my issues with control and insecurity. I'm trying to be better." "Good," Sarah said and meant it. "Everyone deserves the chance to grow." They parted ways amicably, and Sarah walked back to her car, feeling lighter than air. She'd needed that apology, she realized, but not because she required his validation. She'd needed it because it confirmed what she'd known all along. The problem had never been her. It had been his inability to love someone without trying to control them. 5 years after the non-wedding, Sarah stood in an art gallery in Manhattan, surrounded by her paintings. The exhibition was called Reclamation, and each piece told a part of her story: the pain, the healing, the joy of rediscovery. The centerpiece was a massive canvas titled The Altar. It showed a woman in a wedding dress, but instead of looking defeated, she was powerful. She was taking off her veil, dropping it to the floor, her face tilted up toward light streaming through stained glass windows. She was radiant. She was free. Emma stood beside her, now married herself to a kind man who worshipped the ground she walked on. "Do you ever think about how different your life would be if you'd actually married him?" she asked. Sarah considered the question. She thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, smaller, quieter, always apologizing for taking up space. Then she thought about the woman she was now, confident, successful, unapologetically herself. Sometimes she admitted, "But then I remember that the worst thing that ever happened to me was also the best thing, because it forced me to choose myself when no one expected me to. It taught me that walking away takes more courage than staying ever could." She looked around the gallery at all the people admiring her work, at the red sold stickers appearing next to various paintings, at the life she'd built from the ashes of that terrible, wonderful day. "I'm grateful," she said finally. "Grateful for the pain because it led me here. Grateful for the humiliation because it gave me the strength I didn't know I had. Grateful for the ending because it was actually a beginning." Emma squeezed her hand. "You know what the best part is? You inspired thousands of people to choose themselves, too." That altar moment rippled out into the world and changed lives. Sarah smiled, thinking about all the messages she'd received over the years, all the stories of courage she'd heard. "We all have altars," she said softly. "Moments where we have to choose between who we are and who someone else wants us to be. I just happened to have mine in front of 200 people in a church, and you chose yourself." "And I chose myself," Sarah agreed. "Every single time since then, I've chosen myself. And I always will." As the gallery evening wound down and guests began to leave, Sarah stood alone in front of the altar, seeing both the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. The painting was a memorial to a death and a celebration of a birth: the death of a woman who lived to please others, and the birth of a woman who finally understood her worth. She thought about the words she'd spoken in that church 5 years ago. "I deserve someone who loves me on my worst day, at my heaviest weight, with no makeup and messy hair." She'd been looking for that person ever since, and she'd found her. She looked at her reflection in the gallery window and smiled. She was her own happily ever after, and that was the best love story of all.